I've been using the distress inks ever since I started card making. I always use the mini ink cubes and I buy them in the sets of 4 or kits, how they call them. And I thought I will challenge myself and create color combinations using just the kit. And I'm gonna do this for every kit, starting with the kit number 1. The inks in this kit are picked raspberry, mustard seed, peacock feathers, and spice marmalade. For this video, I created 3 color ideas. There is more I could create. Maybe in the future I could do part 2. Alright, first the paper I'm using. I like to use watercolor cardstock for blending with distress inks, more specifically the Canson XL. Occasionally I use other type of cardstock, but I would say this one I use 99% of the time. But use whatever cardstock you prefer. So let's get started with my first color combination idea. Here I'm using the inks Peacock Feathers and Mustard Seed. For this ink blending combination, I wanted to have the color covering the whole panel. And because I cut my Canson XL cardstock smaller than the card base, to prevent it from moving, especially because I'm filming, I put a piece of washi on the back of the cardstock. I'm also using a gray laminated cardstock below it. I started applying the Peacock Feathers ink and the idea was to apply diagonally. It didn't end up that way, but that was the initial idea. The cardstock was moving despite of me having the washi tape on the back, so I picked up a post-it tape and put it on my fingers to hold the paper in place. This way I did not contaminate the colors. I applied 2 coats-ish. This is just the first layer. It doesn't have to be pretty. And then I switched to the mustard seed ink. I applied only 1 layer. I didn't want it to be too bright. I did stop above the blue layer, but you don't have to do that. Now the background looks like it's an Ukrainian flag or colors of IKEA, but I picked up the Peacock Feathers ink and went over it. As you know, blue and yellow create green. So this is a green and blue color combination, despite no green is part of the kit. I went back and applied additional layer of the inks and blended them together. Luckily here I didn't need to do too much blending. One more thing before I move to the next example, I had to add splatter. I used a clean water with clean brush and splattered a few droplets across the panel. Then I took a paper towel and soaked up the ink. Distress inks react with water and this creates a really nice effect. There were a few empty spots, so I added additional splatter to those, and again I used a paper towel to soak up the ink. And that's it, the first background is done, very simple. I will be putting the cards together in the second half of the video. Let's move on to the second color combination, for which I used picked raspberry and mustard seed. I used similar color combination a while ago for one of my vertical videos and I really like it. Here I used 1 color for the middle, creating an oval shape, and 2nd color for the outer part. You can start either with the middle or the outer color. I started with the pink along the edges. I applied sort of a base layer and then I blended in the yellow, leaving a little bit of free space between those colors. This is pretty much the technique I mostly do. First I apply a base layer with a light application and then I apply additional layers, building up the colors, switching between the inks and blending the inks together. It really depends on how juicy the inks are and what kind of paper I'm using. Sometimes I need to apply multiple layers, sometimes 2 are enough. Here I was switching between the picked raspberry and mustard seed. Those colors, when blended together, create orange. So technically you could also use the spice marmalade instead of mustard seed. That color combo would work as well. And once I was happy with the look, I let it dry. After it was drying for some time, I also added splatter. This is just my observation, but if you add splatter right away to distress ink backgrounds, then the splotches will be bigger compared to adding splatter on a dry background. Also, the size of the splatter and the amount of time you wait to soak it up influences the size of the splotches. But generally, what I noticed, if I use same brush, the splatter is smaller if the background is drier. Let me know in the comments what you think. I will assemble the card later. Let's move on my third color combo, for which I'm using all the inks, because if you look at the swatch, It gives me sunset vibes. For this one, I used the washi and taped the full cardstock onto the board. Here I wanted to create a nice border across the panel, but this is completely optional. I wanted to add a sun in the middle of the panel, so I needed to create a mask. I used a circle die to cut it out, and because I don't have a masking paper, I stuck a few washi strips together and die cut them. If you don't have a die, just draw a circle and cut it with scissors. I decided to create sharp lines between the sky, sea and land, so I attached the washi to separate those. This is completely up to you, you don't have to do that, but in that case I would recommend leaving out the mustard seed. If you leave out the yellow, then you can blend the inks from top to bottom. So I placed the mask for the sun just above the washi in the middle, and then I started ink blending. For the sky, I'm using picked raspberry, mustard seed and peacock feathers. I first lightly applied the mustard seed over the sun and also along the horizon in sort of a flat A shape. And this part I would leave out if you are not using a washi, so you don't get green when you are blending with the blue below. The yellow, however, is not going to stay fully yellow because the next ink I used is the picked raspberry. And I applied it across the whole sky, which turned some of the yellow parts orange. And lastly, for the sky, I used the peacock feathers and I applied it over the top part of the sky. The blue over the pink creates a purple or lilac shade. I think it's very pretty. And this way I created a sky that goes from purple to pink to orange and yellow. And you can also use this color combination to create both the first and the second background ideas. I applied more of the pink and blended the colors together, and then I moved to the sea and the sand. Those are straightforward, just one color application. I first relocated the washi to create border between the sea and the sand, and I also wanted to protect the border between the sky. When I was blending the sea with peacock feathers, I was putting less ink below the sun in sort of a U shape. This is to give the illusion of the sun reflecting. I applied multiple layers of the color, especially to the sides and the bottom, creating sort of an ombre effect. And I think the result looks pretty good. After I was finished, I removed the washi. I was going to reuse it, but it would not hold over the freshly blended ink, so I had to use a new strip. At the bottom, I blended the spice marmalade. Here I did not do anything special, just one shade, applying a few layers to get a nice solid color. Next, I removed the washi, including the one over the sun. When you are using a washi or masking tape, make sure it's not too sticky so you don't tear up your cardstock. Before I move on, there is one more ink application. I used the mustard seed ink over the sun, just a light application. You can leave it without any ink, but I prefer it with the ink. So all the backgrounds are done. There are quite a few other color combinations that you can create, but let's move on and assemble the cards. For the first card, I die cut this branch with leaves. 2 I die cut out of a white cardstock and 1 out of a vellum. And then I picked a greeting. Here in this box, I have a lot of greetings that I pre-made. Not only I stamped them, most of them are heat embossed and I also fussy cut them. It took me forever. Anyways, I picked this greeting thinking of you and I thought I will place it over the die cut branches. To attach the white branches, I used a liquid glue. I could use a foam tape, but those are small die cuts and I did not want to fiddle with it. The one out of a vellum, I decided to glue as well. I thought if I apply the glue over the whole die cut, you will not see it. I used glossy accents thinking it will be better, but no, you could still see it. It might be I did not apply it well. So to cover it up, I die cut one more branch and I applied the peacock feathers ink over it, and then I glue it over the vellum branch with leaves. Then I attached the greeting. On the back of the greeting, I used double-sided foam squares and I placed it over the leaves. Lastly, I attached the panel on top of a white card base. I think the white card base fits nicely with the other colors. And the card is done. You can add some embellishments like crystal drops, sequins, and so on, but I kept it very simple. For the pink background, I used a stamp from Create a Smile. It's from the stamp set Botanical Love. I wanted to heat emboss it, so I actually waited until the background is fully dry. You can use a heat gun to dry it, but I prefer to wait. I treated the cardstock with anti-static powder. Then I inked up the stamp with the Versamark ink, which is a sticky ink. I stamped the flower in the middle of the panel. I had to restamp because this is a watercolor cardstock. Then I sprinkled a white embossing powder over it. And lastly, I heat set it with my heat tool. You can leave it as it is, but when I'm using flower stamp sets on these backgrounds, to make the flower pop, I use the distress inks most of the time, the colors I used for the background, and I use them as watercolors and color the flower. I squished the ink onto an acrylic block, and using a water brush pen, I added a little bit of water to the ink and I colored the flower. I used the inks Mustard Seed for the middle of the flower and Spiced Marmalade and Picked Raspberry for the petals, where I was switching between the colors. I applied the orange on every other petal and then I painted the petals in between using the pink. And I added a little bit of orange in the middle as well. Coloring the flower this way, I think it helps the stamped image to pop and shine. And talking about shine, you could add some liquid pearls or any other shimmer to the petals, which I only thought of now. Maybe I will do that next time, that's a pretty good idea. Here you can also add some embellishments, but I just adhered it onto a card base. Again, I used a white card base. I think it complements the white embossing. And also I didn't add any greeting. I don't think greeting is needed for every card. Let's move on to the last card. Since this is a beach scene, adding a silhouette of a palm fits perfectly. The only problem, I do not have a stamp or a die. So I had to draw it myself. Drawing a palm is quite easy, especially when you're doing just a silhouette. Here you can see an example in my sketchbook. I drew the trunk. You can draw it either straight or curved. And then I draw the leaves. From the tip of the trunk, I drew a curved line. And along it, in a quick motion, I drew shorter lines. Here I drew them on each side of the line, but I saw examples with them only on one side. And if you do not have a stamp or a die, doing sketch like this is very helpful. To draw this on the background, I started with a pencil, but it wasn't really needed. I picked a black alcohol marker. This one is from Alton U, and I placed it in the left corner of the panel. I wanted only partial palm. And I drew the leaves the same way as I showed you in my example, first doing a curved line and then quick short strokes. When it comes to the black marker, you can use whatever marker or pen you prefer. I tried multiple ones and settled on this one because it had a tip that was great for the short strokes and it also was very black. The Zig brush marker is also quite good, but I prefer the alcohol marker. I mainly added the leaves or the branches on the right side of the palm, but I also added few in the back to fill up the palm. And the drawing is done. Very quick and easy. I carefully removed the washi from the panel, and on this card I decided to add a greeting, a simple happy birthday banner. I used foam squares on the back and I attached it on top of the panel. Lastly, I used a liquid glue and adhered the panel on top of a card base. Here I used a card base that I made out of a craft cardstock. So all the backgrounds and the cards are done. Here you can see them in a close-up. Let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. I really like all of them. This is such a fun idea. I will try to release these videos once a month, with the next being the kit number 2. So make sure you subscribe to my channel. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like. That is all. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video very soon.